UNFC students. Glad you're here tonight. My name's Landon. I'm one of the pastors. We're in a series called The Controversial Jesus. And so here's how this kind of works tonight. We've been taking controversial topics, talking about them through the lens of Jesus. Last week was kind of 101, so we'll recap that. But here's what I want you to know tonight. At the end of our time tonight, if you got to go, feel free to go. But we're going to hang out for about 15 minutes afterwards and answer your questions. So we had a ton of questions texted in last week. We're going to hit like 8 or 9 of those, and we're going to hit some of those that you all text in live. So I believe there's a number that they're going to put on screen tonight as we talk. So even if I'm saying something and you're like, hey, that popped in my mind, send that text. It's completely anonymous. We're gonna do our best to answer that tonight. So make sure you do that. But like I said, we're looking through what does Jesus say about a lot of these issues? And so tonight, tonight's like the sex talk, right? Okay, now how many of y'all had a sex talk with your parents, okay, at some point in time? How many of y'all like, my parents still ain't done it yet? Like, okay, a few people. So when I had the sex talk, my dad took me to Red Lobster, okay? So literally he was like, hey, son, you want to go to lunch today? And I'm like, sure. And he's like, where do you want to go? And I go, Hooters. Not joking. I think in that moment, my dad was like, this is too late. So I literally said that, and he was like, no, we're not going to go to Hooters today, son. Anywhere else? And I was like, Red Lobster. So we went to Red Lobster, had the sex talk. So we're sitting there over some cheddar biscuits, right? Because if you've been to Red Lobster, that's the only thing good at Red Lobster, is the cheddar biscuits. And he told me all I wanted to know about sex as a 5th grader. So my dad tried to define for me over those glorious cheddar biscuits what sex was and why it was a good thing. And I'll just be honest, didn't take long to convince me, okay? He told me, and little did I know that conversation at Red Lobster would have been a conversation that really, that 3-letter word, sex, would have been my greatest temptation in life, one of my highest joys in marriage, one of the most controversial issues that the world would fight about. I mean, I didn't know what adults were doing when they went to bed at night. Like, I was just like, yeah, they're going to sleep, right? That's what they do. So little did I know that would have been the thing that many of us fight about, that many of us elect presidents over, and many of us argue and debate and have all this controversy around sex. And really, right now, if you think about it, one of the most divisive issues right now is the appointment of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And really, the reason why people are so upset and really freaking out is because the two issues that they're afraid that she's going to help overturn is Roe v. Wade, which is the ruling on abortion that gives states the right to make their rules on abortion and really guarantees it. And then the Obergefell decision, which guarantees protections and gay marriage. And so really, like, the reason why that's such a controversial issue right now is because it has to do with sex. And there's a battle going on because there's one group of people that says, this is what good sex is, and this is what bad sex is. And so tonight I want to speak to you on the topic of the controversial Jesus and good sex. Now, I get there's a little bit of clickbait in this title, right? But I want to take a few minutes and determine tonight what is good sex. And I want to lay my cards on the table tonight and say this, that I believe that sex is a really good thing. I believe God intended sex to be awesome. I believe that it was something that God gave us to produce children, something that produces joy, something that binds a husband and wife together. I don't believe sex is gross. I believe it's good. And I believe there is such a thing as good sex. And if there is such a thing as good sex, then there's the opposite as well. Then there's something called bad sex. So before we go any further, I do want to take a moment and recap last week. Now, each of these weeks are building. This is one message that I'm doing across 5 weeks. So I have a lot to cover. So if you missed last week, the controversial Jesus and cancel culture, go to YouTube tonight and listen to it. Put it on 2 times speed if you have to, but listen to it. So last week we talked about cancel culture and how really what our culture thinks when it comes to sex is this. Our culture says it's morally wrong to tell someone what is morally wrong when it comes to their bedroom, their bodies, and their beliefs about both. So here's why. They say, well, because it's none of my business. It's a private issue. What happens in my bedroom there's no reason why it should be decided in a courtroom, or because it's wrong to judge. Who are you? You're sinful. You're human. Who are you to judge what I do with my beliefs and my bodies and in my bedroom? It's wrong to judge. And then there was kind of the idea that, well, if you tell me what my sexual identity is, that's harmful to me. That's violent. That's not safe speech. It's bullying to me. And so we said the reason why they say that it's morally wrong to tell someone what is morally wrong are because of these issues. But the thing that we talked about last week is that if there is truth, and I think you believe that there is, and I believe, then that truth is going to be controversial, right? There's good and there's bad in this world. So if there is truth, then there is good and bad ways to have sex. So what is good sex? So as teenagers, and I'm trying to put myself in my shoes as a teenager as well, okay? We have this really, this idea that there's like this one thing that's like, this is what good sex will be. And whether you're sexually active as a teenager right now, or whether, that's not even on your radar, you're focused, you're doing your best to stay abstinent and follow Jesus. And so, but I feel like there's this idea that like, there's going to be this moment to where there's good sex and it's going to like fulfill all of our dreams and all the things that we thought about that it was going to be like, and it was just going to be this aha moment. It's like this, it's like good sex is like a trophy. It's like if I can just get to that moment, whether it's in marriage or whether it's that right person, and we think about, a whole host of things. You may think about a conversation that you heard from a friend who shared with you an experience, or you may think of a scene from a Netflix show or porn that you've seen, or you may have read that Cosmo magazine as a 6th grader. You're like in the Kroger aisle, and you're like, oh, good sex, 15 things. And it's like we have these ideas of what this is going to be. And so oftentimes we as teenagers, and I'm just telling you guys, it's going to get real tonight, okay? We often think of good sex in terms of technique. Now, we think that, well, when this sex happens, what's the place? What's the time? What's happening before? What's happening during? Am I ready? Is this the person I want to have sex with or lose my virginity with? How many times? In other words, it's all about the moment sex happens. And there's magazine after magazine. There's article after article. There's pornographic video after pornographic video. And Reddit thread after Reddit thread about what good sex is and what good sex is not. So oftentimes we think about this as like, as long as it feels good and as long as like there's like consent among both parties, then like that is good sex. And so this is really what most people believe, especially when you look at teenagers and high school students. This is what I would say culture's position on good sex is that good sex happens with whoever, whenever, and however you like it. So let me break this down. So, good sex happens with whoever you like. So this is what culture would view. They'd say, all right, so if sex is going to be good, it needs to be it can be with whoever you like. So as long as it's consensual, or maybe it's the person you love, or it's the person you trust to like go that far, go all the way with, or it's just a friend and you trust each other and you think that person's attractive, then that's good sex. And it doesn't matter what you define your gender as long as you think that they're attractive and they're hot and you want to be naked with them, well then that is good sex. And so it really happens with, whoever you want it to. And then there's good sex happens whenever. So if sex is going to be good, it has to happen whenever you like. So waiting until marriage is kind of like your grandparents' view. And if you're in the moment, you're both feeling it, you're both vibing, like it's safe, that's good, right? And if you want to have sex a lot of times in high school, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. If you want to do it while you're drunk, that's fine. If you want to do it later in life, who cares? It's all good. And then there's however you like it. So if sex is going to be good, it has to be with however you like it. So if you're a guy and you like girls, go for it. If you're a guy and you like guys, go for it. If you're a girl and you like girls and guys, go for it. Who am I to judge? And if you want to go all the way, go all the way. If you want to mess around, mess around. If you want to be drunk, be drunk. If you want to do sex acts alone in your bedroom, do it. Sure. Simple. Love is love, right? Sex is good. Good sex happens with whoever, however, and whenever you like it. And really, this position right here, of culture's position, is really kind of supported by three arguments. And again, don't turn your brains off here. So here's kind of argument one for why this is true. Well, sex is just sex, right? So people who would argue this would really kind of argue this from a naturalistic, evolutionary point. In other words, sex is a part of biology. Animals do it. Humans do it. Even plants have a process of reproducing. There's nothing morally wrong or morally right about sex because it's just our natural hormones in our bodies. It's just our nature to have sex. And because sex is just sex, do it with whoever, however, and whenever you like it. That's kind of argument one. Argument two is that, well, safe sex doesn't hurt anyone. So people who would argue this would do so from kind of a secular worldview. In other words, sex is natural. Sex is good, but it's important to do it the right way. This is where the conversation of consent is brought up, birth control, pregnancy risk, STDs. So as long as there's people who have consent at every step along the way and they're being safe about it, who does it hurt? And often this is the view kind of taught in sex ed classes, in health classes, and often this kind of brings the entire conversation of porn in and in like solo sex acts that involve no one. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. It doesn't hurt anybody, so that's good too. And because safe sex doesn't really hurt anyone, then you can do it with whoever, whenever, and however, as long as it's safe and consensual. It's kind of argument two for why culture's view is that way. And then argument three is this. Is that, well, sex is how you discover your identity. So people who would argue this would do so from a postmodern worldview. In other words, sex is deeply related to who you are as a person. So you can identify as whatever sexual orientation or whatever gender you would like. And if you have a moment, you need to have this moment to where you discover who you are sexually. And this is where you kind of like, you declare your sexual identity. And it's not a choice. Because you're not choosing to be this. This is just who you are. It's you've been trapped in the wrong body. You need to experience who you are. And so you declare instead of this birth-defined thing. But in order to discover this, you need to try sex different ways. With different people, with different genders. To determine who you are. And because safe sex is a part of discovering your identity, do it with whoever, whenever, and however you like it. Because you need to figure out who you are before you lock in the rest of your life. And I would say that though you may not believe this, I would say that the majority of high school students believe some version of those three arguments in culture's main point. And those, for people especially who grew up in church, those are really controversial things, but I just want to tell you, I believe, as controversial as those things are, I believe Jesus' view on good sex is far more controversial than any of those three things. And I want to read to you some of his words tonight. Now, you may be thinking, what the heck does Jesus, a virgin, 30-year-old Jewish ancient rabbi, have to do with my sex life? And so what I want to say is this, because he says a lot of controversial things about some private issues. I want to say is this, is if you knew someone who claimed they were the Son of God, predicted their own death and resurrection, and then pulled it off, then you would believe whatever they had to say. So there is a man named Matthew, and you can leave that up on screen, guys. There's a man named Matthew who's one of Jesus' friends. He walked around with Jesus, who claimed he was the Son of God. He listened to him predict his own death and resurrection. He watched him die on a cross. They watched the spear get shoved into his side. He was buried, and then hundreds of other people said that they saw Jesus after they watched him die. And now Matthew believes, because remember, he saw Jesus die, he saw the tomb, he saw the stone, he knew he was dead, and now he's seeing him again. And I would say if you watch that happen to somebody, you would believe whatever they had to say. It doesn't matter what they did say. It doesn't say, it didn't matter at all. If you watched him die and come back to life, said he was the Son of God, and if you did that, I'm believing what you have to say. So here's what Matthew says in Matthew 10, his documentary of Jesus, verse, I believe 30, or Matthew, I don't know where we're at, Matthew 10, verse 3. Okay, here we go. And the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Now, the Pharisees, they were like the legal scribes. They were making sure you were keeping all the rules. And they came up to Jesus and they asked him, hey, Jesus, is it lawful to get a divorce? Now, automatically there's controversy here, because in Jesus' day, one of the biggest sex issues was divorce. And so he's asking, could a man who's married a woman and has had sex with her divorce that, remarry, and begin having sex with someone else? And this is just interesting because even 2,000 years ago, they're arguing about what good sex is. And so he answered him in verse 4. He says this. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? Verse 5. And he said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, Jesus says he made them, he created us in the beginning, male and female, and that there is marriage. The two become one flesh. So Jesus is saying that when you have sex in marriage, that binds you together with that person. You have a connection. So if you've been sexually active before and you've had sex with somebody, you know that you now have a soul tie to that person. There's something in your soul that's tied to them. Jesus says there is a one flesh union happening. And then even biologically, we know that when your bodies are having sex and there's certain hormones that are released and chemicals happen, you are physiologically bound to that person. It's what the ancient Jews called the mingling of souls. So Jesus is saying you're now one flesh. And that divorce is ripping apart of that one flesh. Now, in verse 5, Jesus, there's quotes here, he's referencing something from Genesis, where God makes the world. And here's why this is important. The Old Testament, it's hard to read, right? It's ancient, it's complex, it's covenantal, it's a collection of books that were written to the Jewish people. And because of this, because of its age, because of its difficulty, a lot of people believe that book has been altered and changed over the years. And how can it be trusted? Because all of these people think that the Old Testament now is irrelevant to us because we're not Jews. Therefore, we should just view really the Old Testament not as history, but just like religious writings and stories and metaphors. And we shouldn't really view the Old Testament and what Jesus is saying here as really historical. But again, let me say this. If you knew someone who said they were the Son of God, predicted their own death and resurrection, and pulled it off, you would believe whatever they had to say. And Jesus doesn't talk about the Old Testament like it's some fairy tale. He talks about it like it's historical fact. And again, I don't care if you say Cat in the Hat is historical fact. If you're the Son of God, you claim that, you predict your death, you pull it off, I'm going to believe it. And that's what Jesus did. And he says it's fact. So that's why the Old Testament is so important to us. And he's saying that, man, the Old Testament said that we were made male and female. And he says, so they are no longer two flesh, but one. Verse 6 says this. Therefore, they are no longer two flesh, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. See, this is why divorce is so hurtful. It's because divorce is bad sex. Because a no-fault divorce, where you just get divorced because you fell out of love, it separates what God brought together. And divorce is literally the ripping apart of two souls that have been mingled. So if sex is going to be good, well, here's what Jesus is saying. It's my bottom line tonight. is this, is that good sex happens God's way. So divorce is not God's way. Doesn't matter if it was a legit divorce that your parents went through because somebody cheated or abandoned the other, abused the other, or if they just kind of fell out of love. It's not God's way. And Jesus is saying it's not good to separate that. In other words, when there's sex that happens, good sex happens God's way. In other words, there is a way that sex happens that pleases God. And there's a way to have sex that displeases God. And there's a way to have sex that's satisfying to your soul. And there's a way to have sex that brings shame to your soul. There's a way to have sex that's morally right. And there's a way to have sex that is morally wrong. And good sex happens God's way. And from this passage, he really kind of tells us three things about what good sex is. And I'm going to read these pretty quickly. But Jesus says this, that God's way for good sex happens between one man and one woman. He said, the man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, because God created them male and female. This is not my words. This is God's words. This is Jesus' words. The guy who pulled off his own death and resurrection. He says it's between a man and a woman. Then he says God's way for good sex happens in the safety of covenant. Now, we see that there's the two becoming one flesh. It's a safety net. It's what we would call marriage. But there's a covenant that says we're not going to separate. And so many people say, well, I love my girlfriend. Okay? But until you say, no, I'm not leaving you the rest of my life, and I want accountability, and I want to say this before God, that's what's called marriage. Is that's what God says, not my words, Jesus' words. What good sex is it happens in the safety of a covenant. And then it says this is really, we see this throughout other scriptures, but also in verse 5, that God's way for good sex is for a variety of reasons. And here's why sex is so good, okay? So here's the reason why God created sex. Well, number one is procreation. So making babies, right? Having kids. Propagating our species, making more of us. We got to have kids that we can raise who will one day grow up and love Jesus. But then there's also sanctification. And sanctification is to make you more like Jesus. So when you're in marriage, guess what? One of the ways you fight sin is sex. One of the greatest ways in marriage for you to keep temptation out of your marriage one day is to have sex with your wife or have sex with your husband. It makes you more like Jesus. It binds you together. It's a good thing. And then the third reason why God created sex is procreation, sanctification, and recreation. It's fun, all right? Sex is a good thing that God gives to one man and one woman for a lifetime. It's procreation, sanctification, and recreation. This is God's intent and God's design for good sex. So if sex is happening in this good and godly way, then that's good sex. And this view is totally countercultural, that there's a morally wrong way to have sex and a morally right way. And that sex with whoever, however, and whenever you like it is not good according to Jesus' words, not mine. In fact, it's bad for your soul. And see, I believe that good sex God's way is the most controversial way that you can live and believe in today's world. And I believe it's so controversial because it flies in the face of no-fault divorce. It flies in the face of feminism. It flies in the face of men who want to pressure women to have sex with them. It flies in the face of the LGBTQ movement. It flies in the face of secularism. It's so controversial to culture. And here's what I believe about culture's view of good sex. Whoever, however, whenever you like it. I believe this, is that culture's view of good sex is not controversial. It's contradictory. So let me break this down one by one in these arguments. So argument one here for why good sex happens with whoever, whenever, and however you like it is, well, sex is just sex. So this view really makes us out to be products of nature, right? So the idea that there are chemicals in our body, hormones, desires that make us want to reproduce, to keep our species alive, evolution. You've learned probably a lot of this in school. Therefore, sex is just a part of nature. Now, what this does is we essentially say that, well, humans don't have a moral code. So we essentially are, in this view, are not humans with a moral code, but we're just mammals that act the way mammals act. For example, my dog's a mammal. My dog was born with the ability to reproduce. We took that from him at the vet at an early age. But here's the deal. Kona is not morally wrong to try to have sex with another dog, okay? Like, he's not like a sinner going to hell for that. You know, and you guys know what dogs do, all right? Terrible things to, like, couch cushions and everything, okay? So, like, the dogs aren't morally wrong for doing that. Why? Because they're dogs. They're animals. That's just who they are. But it is morally wrong, right, to have sex with a child. It's morally wrong, right, to have sex with an animal. It's morally wrong for us to have sex with another man's wife. It's morally wrong to buy a teenager to have sex. Even if that person has a biological urge to be a pedophile. Is that person morally wrong? Yes. Because sex is not just sex. Here's my point. It's contradictory to believe sex is just sex while believing there is a morally wrong way to have sex. So people are going to tell you, you have sex with whoever. It's just natural. Just go for it. But in order to do that, we would have to say there's no such thing as morally wrong sex. In other words, if sex is just sex, then all sex is just sex. And as long as there's a biological urge and a chemical attraction happening, then sex is just sex because it's natural. But that's crazy, right? This is why sex trafficking is criminal. It's why pedophilia is criminal. That's why there's a whole host of laws protecting the most vulnerable in our world, because sex is not just sex. Sex is a physical act, but it is also a moral act, and I would even argue a spiritual act, which completely affirms Jesus' point that good sex should happen between a man and a woman in a safe and good context of marriage. Because if we can't say that sex is morally wrong, then we can't say that any sex is morally wrong. That's some scary stuff. So for me and Jesus, we don't believe sex is just sex because we'd rather be controversial than contradictory. So I'd rather have good sex God's way. So let me break down argument number 2 here. So because good sex happens with whoever, whenever, and however you like it, the argument to support that is, well, safe sex doesn't hurt anyone. So what this is kind of saying is, as long as there's consent along the way, everybody's in agreement here, as long as there's contraceptives that are taking place to avoid STDs and maybe some unwanted pregnancies, then all of that, man, go for it. That's good sex. And I want to show you why this is contradictory. Because everyone has experience who's had any sexual activity, sexual shame. Guys, after you watch porn, you feel awful. If your dad's had a consensual affair with another woman, there's trauma in your family now. You may have had sex in middle school with a guy, and that person still sticks with you even though he hasn't talked to you since. You may have consensually sent a picture to a boy that you loved, and you broke up, and now everyone has it. See, many of you are here today, and the trauma you experience in your life is because of someone else's decision to have safe and consensual sex that has brought you so much pain in your life. Maybe someone's safe and consensual sex was filmed and exposed to you through porn at a young age, and now you're hooked as a 9th grader. That was me. Or maybe Maybe your safe and sexual act of sending a snap of yourself that disappears was screenshot and is now on the screen of someone else. Maybe your safe and consensual sex is something you're going to have to tell your fiance one day when you get engaged. Here's my point. It's contradictory, y'all, to believe that consensual sex doesn't hurt anyone when sex brings pain and shame outside of marriage. You see, sex is like a fire, right? When that fire is burning, it's hot and it keeps you warm at night. But in the morning, when that fire is out, there's a burnt pit of ashes in its trail. You see, sex that doesn't happen God's way always brings about pain and shame. And this is consistent with what Jesus says. Is because Adam and Eve sinned, and before they sinned in the Garden of Eden, they were naked and they were unashamed. That is until sin entered the world. And because when sin entered the world, they made a decision they weren't going to do God's way for their life. And anytime we don't do God's good way for our life, we create a ash pit of embers and shame. And so there's no such thing as safe sex that doesn't happen God's way when it produces shame. So for me and Jesus, we don't believe safe sex doesn't hurt anyone because we'd rather be controversial, really controversial, than contradictory. I'd rather have good sex God's way. Then argument 3 to kind of propagate this thesis here is that, well, good sex happens with whoever, whenever, and however you like it. And here's why. Because sex is discovering your identity. This is really important. So, therefore, being a teenager, right? And this is what people will tell you, is you need to experiment sexually to find what you like, to find what feels right, so you can declare who you are. So you sleep around, you explore your body, you're kissing guys and you're kissing girls to see what you like. And if you like it, if you feel like there's fireworks happening chemically, then that is good sex for you. And I want to show you why this is contradictory. The question is, are you what you feel? Okay, don't turn your brains off. Are you what you feel? So, if you were born a male, biologically, chromosomally, and you feel like a woman, does that make you a woman? Are you what you feel? So this is the LGBTQ agenda, which we're going to really talk about in detail next week. But do your feelings legitimize who you are as a person? So then my question is, what if a very healthy girl feels they are overweight? Does that make them overweight? So she has a eating disorder because of that. Do those feelings legitimize who she is? What if I feel like an animal? Does that mean I can do what animals do? Does that mean I can fly? Does that mean, do those things legitimize who I am? See, I know, and I would say you probably agree with this, no matter who you are. You've probably felt some pretty awful things about yourself at some point in time, right? We felt stupid. We felt worthless. We felt some pretty bad things. But are we what we feel? Here's my point. It's contradictory to believe sex is discovering your identity while believing you are more than what you feel. And I would say that most of us believe this, that we are more than our feelings. Here's why. When someone has an eating disorder, do you give them liposuction? No, because they don't need that. When someone feels like they're dead, do we say, go ahead, commit suicide? No, we don't do that. Why? Because you and I would all agree that we are far more than what we feel, right? I can feel like I can feel one thing one day and can feel the complete opposite the next day. See, it's contradictory to believe that I just need to discover who I am by seeing what feels right. See, listen, guys, And I mean this with everything in me. Your gender is not fluid. Your feelings are fluid. It's up and down all the time, especially as a teenager. Your hormones are doing things. Your body's developing. You're changing so much. You are not what you feel. You are so much more than that. See, we don't, our feelings are not final. So for me and Jesus, we don't believe that safe sex is discovering your identity, because we'd rather be controversial than contradictory. I'd rather have good sex God's way. So that's my bottom line, is that good sex always happens God's way. And let me kind of prove this to you tonight. It all comes down to a turtle and a table. Bet you didn't see that coming. So this is a turtle. So, funny story about said turtle. So I was a little late on getting my illustration. I was going to go to Petco to buy my turtle for the illustration tonight. And so I go, and they're out of turtles, and it was going to have to drive a long ways to go get another turtle from a different pet store. And so I'm like looking around at Walmart and Target trying to find like a toy turtle. No toy turtles out there. Just in case you were wondering, and put it in your Amazon cart. You'll get it that way. So couldn't find a turtle, so I'm calling Leanna, and I'm like, hey, does my daughter Nora, does she have a turtle? Does she have like a toy stuffed animal turtle? And she's like, no. She's got this dinosaur. It kind of looks like a turtle. Maybe it'll work. I was like, all right, bring it. Well, can you bring it to the church? She's like, yeah. So I get a FaceTime. She's like, found a turtle. Literally driving from my house 5 minutes away to the church. She found a turtle. So I was like, perfect. We'll put him back tonight. Don't worry. I have a pond behind my house. He'll love my dog. Promise. So let's say, and I don't want to pick him up too much, but let's say that this turtle, I've been feeding him carrots all day. He loves them. So let's say that you wind up, and in this turtle, you walk into a room, and you see that this turtle is on a table. Do you think that turtle can climb? Wow. I've never seen a climbing turtle, but they exist now. You don't think that, do you? What do you think? You think, obviously, well, Pastor Lena's wife, Leanna, found a turtle on the way to the church. No. You think someone put that turtle on a table, right? You don't just think, wow, this is amazing. There's a turtle. He learned all these new things. It's so crazy. This just happened. No, you think someone picked the turtle up, put it in the center of the table, and walked away. And now it's pink. Here's my point, and this is why a turtle on a table matters. When you look at how our bodies were made, and you look at all the things you learn in anatomy and physiology, and all how cells work, and how the egg and the sperm and the zygote and the gamete and all these different things that are happening biologically in our bodies, and how we were literally like from the moment of conception, we have everything we need at the moment of conception to be a 60-year-old man or a 60-year-old woman. And sure, our bodies aren't perfect, right? We got chemical imbalances. We not everybody's born with the same mental capacities as you and I. I mean, we all are born different. Like, our bodies aren't perfect by any means. But from the moment we are conceived, we have everything we need in order to be a male or a female, in order to be a human who contributes to society, in order from this egg and this sperm then grows up and creates Google or Facebook or Apple. And you look at, whoa, this is incredible. You don't just think, wow, that just happens by chance. Turtle on the table, so cool. No, you think someone created the turtle on the table illustration. Someone picked up the turtle, put it on the table, and put it on YouTube tonight. My point is, if there's a creator, or if there's creation that's happened, you don't think it just happened by chance. No, when you look and you see creation, and you see the way we were made as sexual beings, you think someone created this, right? And you don't have to be a believer in Jesus to believe this. But when you look at the complexity of life, you look at our bodies, if you look at just our world, you think, you look at the skies and the heavens declare the glory of God. And you look at your bodies and you look at the way God made sexual relations and they just say, this declares that someone made this. And if there's a creator, then there is, go by, a creation. And we are that creation. And here's the deal. With anything, when you create something, there's a good way to use it and a bad way to use it. There's a good way to use a gun. There's a bad way to use a gun. There's a good way to use a car. There's a bad way to use a car. There's a good way to fly a plane, and there's a bad way to fly a plane. There's a good way to pull the lever on your parachute and go down without ever really missing a beat, without getting hurt. And there's another way that you don't pull that lever on the parachute and you just hope that it pops out, that you end up dead on the ground. So with sex, there's a good way and there's a bad way. Why? Because we were created. And I would just say for a moment that maybe if we were created, the guy who claimed he was the Son of God, who pulled off predicting his own death and his resurrection and pulled it off, maybe he is that creator. And maybe, just maybe, he knows the way things work best. Because he is the one who put the turtle on the table. And maybe we listen to his words because he did it. So, next week, we're going to take 3 topics over the next 3 weeks. Next week, we're going to start with this. We're going to talk about the LGBTQ agenda and gender. And we're going to talk about how did God create that, and how do we kind of work in that, and what does this mean, and how does Jesus' words apply to that. And then we're going to look at pornography and sexual assault because they're deeply linked together. And I want to show that to you. And then week 5, right before we go to Thanksgiving, we're going to talk about abortion. And here's the deal. Man, good sex, it happens God's way. So what's God's way in all 3 of those things? I hope you will join us back here next week for week 3 on the controversial Jesus and the LGBTQ community. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much that you created me and you created my friends in this room. And God, I just pray that maybe tonight would change someone's life. And maybe tonight someone would take your word seriously for the first time. And that even as they think about who they are and their identity, and even how you made each and every person in here with a fingerprint that doesn't match anyone else's. That you're just this incredible creator. That maybe it would teach us to look not into what we think is right, but what you think is right in your words. So God, we love you. And it's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Amen. So